The 10th century Islamic world operated under a heavy synthesis of thought. Intellectual life was bound by a strict alignment of Greek philosophy and religious doctrine. To be educated meant internalizing three absolute pillars of knowledge: the medical canon of the Greek physician Galen, the physical cosmology of Aristotle, and the theological hierarchy of religious orthodoxy. Abu Bakr al-Rāzī emerged as a systemic skeptic within this rigid environment. Born in the Persian city of Rāzī before eventually practicing medicine in Baghdad, he refused to accept these inherited systems on faith. The target of his skepticism was a specific intellectual sin: taqlīd. Taqlīd is the uncritical reliance on the authority of predecessors, or the blind imitation of accepted dogma. To defeat taqlīd, al-Rāzī deployed a single absolute axiom. He argued that Ak, the universal human intellect or reason, is the supreme and final judge of truth. He deployed this absolute reliance on reason as a universal tool. Al-Rāzī used it to systematically dismantle unquestioned authorities across medicine, physics, and theology. Al-Rāzī's methodology is most visible in his medical career. He revered Galen as a master physician, but he strictly refused to treat Galen's texts as infallible scripture. This approach is recorded in his comprehensive book. Rather than a passive encyclopedia of accepted facts, this text served as an active laboratory to test Greek medical theory against reality. Al-Rāzī recorded his own empirical case notes and clinical experiences, using them to actively confirm or disconfirm the standard assumptions of the era. He formalized this confrontation in a text titled Doubts About Galen. Here, he targeted specific philosophical and anatomical weaknesses in the master's work. This animated diagram illustrates one of their major clashes: the theory of vision. Galen promoted an extra-missionist model. This model assumed that pneuma, a vital spirit or subtle air, emitted outward from the eye to physically touch external objects. Al-Rāzī offered an intra-missionist correction. He argued that vision occurs in the exact opposite direction, with discrete units of incorporeal data traveling from the external object to the observer. He also turned Galen's own empirical logic against him. Galen offered non-demonstrative proofs, arguing for the eternity of the physical world based on its apparent lack of decay. Al-Rāzī dismantled this by pointing out that sudden destruction can easily follow long periods of stasis. In Al-Rāzī's framework, physical observation and logical deduction outrank the historical prestige of the author. Al-Rāzī carried this exact empirical rigor into physics. He confronted a massive cosmological problem. How does a perfectly wise God create a physical universe filled with intense suffering? He started by rejecting the orthodox doctrine of creation ex nihilo. Ex nihilo is the concept that God created the universe instantly out of nothing. Look at this seedling pushing through dry earth. If God creates instantly from nothing, he wouldn't force living things to undergo slow, painful biological development. The consequence was clear. God must have used pre-existing materials and parameters to build the cosmos. To explain this, he had to discard Aristotelian physics. Aristotle argued that time and space are dependent phenomena, existing only relative to moving bodies and containers. This diagram compares Aristotle's relative physics on the left with Al-Rāzī's Platonic framework on the right. Al-Rāzī defines the first two of his 5 eternal principles: an infinite absolute place, or void, intersecting with an eternal absolute time, or duration. Then he introduces the third principle, absolute matter.
These are atomistic particles that exist independently and populate the void, combining to create basic elements based on their density. The theological catalyst for creation is the fourth principle, the soul. According to Al-Rāzī, the soul is foolish and develops a passionate desire, or ishq, to mix with matter. This provides his theodicy, his explanation for why evil exists. The suffering in the universe is a direct result of the soul's foolish mixture with matter, not a flaw in God's initial design. God is the fifth and final principle. God intervenes not to stop the mixture, but to bestow intellect, or akal, upon the soul, so it can eventually learn to free itself. Al-Rāzī's 5 eternal principles engineer a universe that accounts for physical suffering, without violating the logic of space, time, or divine perfection. If God's tool for spiritual liberation is intellect, the logical consequence is that this tool is distributed equally to all humans. This directly threatened the dominant Orthodox and Ismaili religious models of epistemology. Ismailism is a branch of Shia Islam that relies heavily on an imam to guide the faithful. As this flowchart demonstrates, their system depends on the exclusive, top-down transmission of divine knowledge. This system intentionally enforces taqlid. It requires the masses at the bottom to blindly trust the exclusive human authorities positioned above them. Rāzī countered with a radically egalitarian model that attacked the necessity of prophecy itself. His critique was ethical. He argued that it is inherently unjust and irrational for God to single out specific individuals for divine truth. He observed that claiming exclusive prophetic authority inevitably breeds dissension and sectarian violence among competing groups of followers. Rejecting religion did not lead Rāzī to pure hedonism. Instead, he advocated for a moderate philosophical way of life. He drew on Plato's Timaeus to define pleasure. Pleasure is not a positive good you can maximize, but merely the therapeutic removal of a painful state. Drinking, for example, is only pleasant because it removes the pain of thirst. He established a strict ethical limit. Action is permitted only up to the boundary where it causes more long-term pain than pleasure, or requires engaging in injustice that displeases God. His attack on prophecy was a moral imperative. He sought to protect universal human reason from the violence and subjugation caused by uncritical religious authority. There is a severe historical irony to Rāzī's legacy. Almost none of his standalone philosophical or theological texts survived the centuries intact. His ideas were considered so dangerous that they were preserved primarily as fragments, quoted inside the refutations written by his ideological enemies. His primary preservers were Ismaili theologians like Abu Hatim al-Rāzī and Nasir-e-Khosrow, who wrote aggressively against his cosmological and ethical frameworks. This hostility extended across the Islamic world. Later figures like Fakhr al-Din al-Rāzī and the Jewish philosopher Maimonides dedicated specific texts to dismantling his theodicy. Al-Rāzī was a rigorous system builder. He applied the exact same empirical demands to the abstract cosmos as he did to a patient's bedside. His historical impact remains divided. While his five eternals and anti-prophetic stances were rejected by mainstream philosophy, his medical empiricism was widely adopted, eventually becoming foundational in Renaissance European universities. Al-Rāzī proves that the truest form of intellectual legacy is not found in demanding blind worship, but in providing a rational, empirical framework that withstands and invites ruthless critique.